Lots of questions this morning, perhaps most crucial. What can Europe do without American support? As you heard in the news, the Armed Forces Minister Luke Pollard told Kate that Britain could deploy military in Ukraine without American support, but for a durable and lasting peace, the US needed to be involved. Polish Prime Minister was saying this weekend that Europe needed to start believing that it was a global power. He pointed out that Europe has 2.6 million soldiers compared to 1.1 million in Russia, as well as more fighter jets. And of course, the EU's economy dwarfs Russia's. So how far could we go it alone? In a moment, we'll discuss that with General Chip Chapman. He was senior British military advisor to the US Central Command. But first, the Times World Affairs editor, Catherine Philp, who joins us from Warsaw. Catherine, morning to you.
Good morning, Sig.
The lesson of our programme this morning has been a little bit that there's a lot of tough talk coming out of the capitals of Europe, that Europe is a giant that's awoken, that heavy lifting needs to be done. But when you poke at it a little bit, it still seems to come back to the central point that America still has to be involved.
I think that's certainly true when it comes to reaching a peace in Ukraine. I wouldn't underestimate how important the belated shock of this is to Europe, and that it may have to put Europe on a path where it is in future capable of acting without the US. But in terms of where we are right now, that seems to be the case, yeah.
And why is that, Catherine? A couple of people have made the point, and we put this to an Ukrainian MP. Could Europe even try and do a mineral deal with Ukraine and say, well, not only will we give you security, not only will European military step up, but we'll go into partnership to you for minerals, so you don't need a deal with Donald Trump? Is that a naive question, or is that a possibility?
It's a possibility in commercial terms. I think that the problem is that this mineral deal really was seen by and advanced originally by Ukraine as a means to extracting guarantees from the US. Now, if that's the critical part of it, and Europe can't offer that, then there really is a question mark over why they would seek it.
And also, presumably, it's a question of what America wants to do with Russia as well, which Europe, I suppose, would be less willing to deal with it. On that point, Catherine, I'm struck by this, that we talk an awful lot about what Ukraine is willing to do, what the US is willing to do, what the Europeans are willing to do. Is anyone talking about what concessions Russia will have to make beyond simply stopping fighting? I'm very struck that all we seem to be saying is, well, Russia will be given a free pass, really, for the last 3 years, provided that they stick with what they've got thus far. It seems to be the general tenor of the conversation.
Well, I think that's because the US has led the conversation thus far and is laying out the terms. And as we see, we've got someone in the White House right now who seems more interested in using carrots for Russia than sticks. And that conversation hasn't changed because it is America in the lead, and because Europe is in a position that whilst it's trying to come up with ideas, and we're yet to see the details of what the British, French and Ukrainians have cooked up this weekend to put in front of Donald Trump, they're not in a position to make the kind of threats to Russia, I guess you would put it. I mean, when we talk about security guarantees, I think that this phrase is now getting so kind of distant from what it really means. And I think it's becoming quite hollow. We have to understand what that means. That means consequences for your actions. That means being prepared to take military action directly. That is, or at the very least, empower Ukraine to do it, or empower whoever is militarily on the ground in Ukraine. But that is what it means, and that's a big deal. And that is why I think that we're hearing it in these terms. I mean, the same goes for talking about how China might be involved. Like, who actually is prepared to essentially launch military action against Russia if they break the terms of the ceasefire?
It's such a good point, that, and we use the phrase backstop as if it means something you play a game with, and it becomes a euphemism, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we use the backstop about Brexit. What is a backstop? Does it simply mean the deployment of air cover to support peacekeepers who might be on the ground in Ukraine? What does it mean? I mean, Ukraine's been here before. This was the issue with the Budapest Memorandum, whereby Ukraine gave up custody of the Soviet nuclear arsenal that was on its soil, and that was supposed to be in return for security guarantees from essentially both sides in the Cold War, that its territorial integrity would be respected. Well, look where we are. Nothing was enforced. Those security guarantees were meaningless. So what are these security guarantees, and who in the end is actually prepared to stand by them?
It's such a great question, and one we don't entirely know the answer to. Catherine, lovely to speak to you as ever. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's Catherine Philp there from Warsaw. Let's talk to General Chip Chapman, who is Senior British Military Advisor to the US Central Command. Chip, morning to you.
Good morning, Steve.
I guess this boils down to the question. There's a lot of talk coming out of the European capitals today. Does Europe, without America, have the military capability to keep Ukraine safe over the next decade?
Well, European NATO outspends Russia by a quantum of about 4-1. So in terms of monetary effect and GDP, it could. Now, at the moment, of course, the overarching architecture of command and control and the satellite power of the Americans, and that is one of the domains of war now, space power, means that we would be losing a lot if we didn't do that. But I think one of the things that was really trying to be established yesterday, as we often talk about the strategy bridge between political intent and military power, I think what Starmer and Europe are trying to do is trying to have that transatlantic bridge between American political intent and American military power and try and harness that, allied to the fact that, of course, Ukraine and Europe have agency in the future of what happens. This is not just a standoff between Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine and America. And it's quite right that most people have not said that what are Russia up to here. And that's the problem from the American perspective. So, for example, the mineral deal, so-called, is really based on this geoeconomic theory of warfare, and that if you have American miners there, according to Trump, then that would be its own security guarantee. The trouble with that, it's too simplistic and it's obsolete, and it was shown to be obsolete in 1990 when big American oil companies didn't prevent the first Gulf War when Kuwait invaded. Political leaders of the world are not bookkeepers and accountants. And what this all misses is what is Russia's grand strategic and strategic objectives. Their real grand strategic objective is to regain lost territory and spheres of influence, diminish US influence globally, and strategically to divide and deter NATO and divide and weaken the EU. And the American approach at the moment seems to be talking up the talking points of Russia and none of the ones of the other side.
Well, maybe that America agrees with half of those strategic desires. Then they're less interested in Europe. They're hostile to the EU. They probably don't care very much about Ukraine or Europe more generally. So when you start putting those things together, what Russia wants and what America at least cares about are fairly close together anyway.
Well, they haven't been historically, and one of the great speeches in the Reagan Republican era on the 40th anniversary of D-Day was that isolationism never was and never will be an acceptable response to tyrannical governments with an expansionist intent. That is what Russia has. If Trump cannot see that, then we've got a problem. Now, I'm slightly sanguine in the sense that we're going to have a new German chancellor, and I think he will be quite hard over. In terms of the EU, Article 42.7 says that you should aid and assist by all possible means any country which is threatened. And again, what's also been missing so far in the last few minutes is that the reason that the post-1945 architecture has worked is because of deterrence. Deterrence works either by denial, by being there, or by punishment. It's there to ensure that you don't have war fighting. And we've lived in the longest era of peace ever because of the success of deterrence. We want to try and reinforce that for the future.
And just finally, just boil it down for us. As it stands today, how much could the British military reasonably perform here?
By itself, not very much, but this would be a coalition. It would not be a single nation. And we need to ensure that this is not a capitulation peace imposed on Ukraine. And that's why Zelensky took the approach he did.
And does that have to involve the US?
It would be far better if it did, because they are still the only hegemon and strategic superpower.
Yeah, it keeps coming back to that point, doesn't it? Chip, good to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Steve.
That's Chip Chapman there, General Chip Chapman, Senior British Military Advisor to the US Central Command, believing that there's American interest in security in Europe still, but they'll have to be, Kate, because as we keep hearing, if they're not there, it's very hard to see what is effectively achieved by simply a European force.